Well, there we go. Recording's on. So once again, Bret Perry, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. I'll just give Bret a little bit of kind of intro and talk kind of an overview of a few of the things he's done, and then he can correct me if I get anything wrong. But it's quite a list. So 12 Sydney Hobart Yacht Races. He was part of the America's Cup in 2007 as a rigger for the French team. 2008 to 9 Volvo Ocean Race as well. 5 years in the Mini Transat in a design that he co-designed, as I understand. Co-host of Bar Karate podcast, sailing podcast. So if you haven't heard of that, definitely check it out. And recently co-designed X2 with Farr Yachts.
That's about it in a nutshell.
No? Okay, and a lot more, I'm sure.
Yeah. Heaps more, always heaps more.
Yeah. And Bret, actually, I think why don't we start with, could you just tell us a bit about how you actually got into sailing? Like, how did you get started way back, whenever it was?
I was a little bit of a late starter, sailing-wise. I grew up in the suburbs in Adelaide, and it just so happened that for my year 12, I studied PE, and I chose windsurfing. And lo and behold, I got 100%. I don't know why and how, but never sailed before. And I managed to dux the class, and I sort of felt like I had some sort of natural talent for it. I don't know what happened and how it happened, and followed the path of Wally One Designs in Adelaide. Went from obviously the longboards, and then started wave and slalom sailing. So I actually started windsurfing was my first introduction to sailing. So a bit of a different step.
Yeah, great. Okay, and then when did you kind of get into, because you've obviously done a lot in yachts, like what was your progression from the windsurfing through other classes?
We had a education department run sailing program in Adelaide. We still do, and that was how I did my windsurfing. And then I just so turned out that we moved down towards the beach, and I happened to make a friend with someone who worked at the same place that I did the windsurfing. And he decided that I should come and work as a sailing instructor. So I'd never done much sailing on dinghies, and I ended up as a sailing instructor. Pretty well, that's it. And I started sailing every day of my life. And then went from there to sailing on international 14s, Sharpies, and just non-stop. I was just hook, line and sinker. Because I started at a later date, I think I hadn't had that burnout, I guess, as a lot of the younger kids were having. And I just kept going and pushing, and I just sailed everything. And then ended up on the big boats in Adelaide with a program called Secret Men's Business, which is a very famous South Australian program. And I just went from there. I was pretty well taught everything I know on the water by the one and only Mega, Jeff Bascom, who has passed now. But Mega has taught a lot of young people coming through about the ways of the ocean and what to look out for. He was uncanny in the way that he was able to, he knew Bass Strait like you got no idea. And I ended up doing something like 26 or 27 crossings with him. And he never ceased to amaze me. His decisions were done instinctually and always right.
And because you said you've done 12 Hobarts, but then 26, 27 Bass Strait crossings, was that a lot of kind of yacht deliveries and stuff in there as well?
Yeah, well, Secret Men's is from Adelaide, as you know,
yeah.
And Jeff Betcher, the owner, is a mad Adelaide person. So if you start my year off on the delivery to Sydney for the Telstra Cup back in the day, and then the Sydney to Hobart, I then would deliver Hobart back to Adelaide. I would then prepare the boat for a couple of months, and I would go from Adelaide back to Sydney for the Sydney to Southport. I would then do the Southport. I'd deliver the boat to Hamilton Island Race Week, Airlie Beach Race Week, back down to Sydney, back down around to Adelaide for opening day in October. And then I would pack the boat up and go back to Sydney for the Sydney Hobart. And that was my year for 5 years. So pretty well non-stop on the ocean.
Yeah, full on. But, what a good learning. I've done a lot of deliveries kind of a few years back when I had time, and just such a good way to kind of get some sea miles up and learn the boat and just get used to being out on the ocean. So So I guess you've spent a few years in Europe because when I met you, I think it was must have been about a year ago, or correct me on that. I had the pleasure of sailing with Bret at Middle Harbour.
Well, I reckon it was a couple of years ago. That was when I just first got back. Yeah, a
It
couple
was
of years
when you
ago.
just came back. Must have been a couple
Mm.
of years ago. Time flies. So, but yeah, so you've spent quite a few years in Europe prior to that. So, what was your journey kind of from sailing in Australia, non-secret men's business, through to kind of sailing in Europe?
Well, after 4 or 5 years of working with Secret Men's Business and going through that process of just doing the same thing, I was sailing with the guys from Doyle's, and that back in the day it was the start of D4 sales, which Bob Fraser was doing in Summersby, and Mark Fullerton actually said, "Mate, you've got to come up and base yourself in Sydney. You know, living in Adelaide's good, but there's a profession here. You know, you can do it for a living." And I just went, "Well, what, sail for a living? Like, get paid?" And they said, yeah, come up. So I was getting a little bit of pocket money from Jeff Betcher, but nothing, you know, it wasn't a living. So I was just enjoying sailing. And so I came up to Sydney, and I started sailing professionally here in Sydney, and was involved in programs such as Hollywood Boulevard, Seriously 10, Loki, some of the boats that I was involved in. And then after 10 years, pretty well 10 Hobart straight, actually, I didn't miss a Hobart for 10 years. So I was finding myself burnt out because it was the same thing. It was, you know, Southport, Hamilton Island, back for Hobart, and then back again and do it all again the same time, you know, for the rest of the year. So an opportunity came up pretty well in December, actually, in 2006, and it was an emergency phone call almost. And I got asked if I could go to Spain to help out with the French team. It was actually Wade Morgan, who people know him as Bubsy, and Billy Merrington were on the program as well, and they asked if I could come over and help them out with the rigging side of things. And I basically did the 2006 Hobart and flew straight from Hobart with my wet weather gear still in my bag and still wet, straight to Spain. And I started work. It was pretty well thrown into the frying pan, though. It was the Cup was only 6 months away, and it was just all on. It was a whole new world for me. I mean, I never really wanted to go. Well, I never really dreamed of doing the Cup or the Volvo for that matter. I just ended up there, and it was mayhem.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. And because you'd been working around boats obviously for a long time here, had you been working as a rigger specifically in Sydney before you went over?
No, this is the funny story. No, I was sort of just sailing, just non-stop sailing. I mean, I had a basic knowledge of everything, but as I said, I went over there and I was literally thrown in the deep end. The first thing that happened was a brand new mast arrived, and it was, there you go, unpack it, rig it, get it going, and it was okay. And then the new boat arrived 2 weeks later, and it was long hours. It was 7 days a week. It was, I many a night slept in the office upstairs and, did 3 hours and then came back and kept going. A lot of people don't realise the amount of work, and for the shore people, when you see the America's Cup and you see all the glitz and glamour in the front of it, the people are getting better at recognise it, but the shore crew back then, it was a hard slog.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, and they're very technical boats, and they've become more and more technical as the years go by. But I mean, in 2007, I mean, that would have been, how did you kind of just talk us through? How did you go about being thrown in, not being a rigger before, and getting on this boat and then figuring it out? That's quite a feat, actually.
I mean, every boat is sort of similar in the way they're put together, and we'd been working in Sydney for 10 years, and it was basically just more technical and more stuff to think about. So the AC version 5 boats, which was the last of the monohull boats before the 33rd AC in Valencia, was based around traditional types of boats. It was a fantastic Cup 2007. Lingy basically came down to the last race, and Lingy won the race by a second, I think, to get it. And the crowds were fantastic, and the whole vibe was wonderful. But in terms of the work itself, I mean, it became very systematic. The boat would come in at the end of the day, and we'd rock up. So we'd be resting while they were out sailing, and then I wasn't sailing, but they'd come in and it was just hammer and tongs. Strip the boat down. It's strip the boat down completely and then put it back together again. And off they go again the next day, every day.
So how much, I guess, were you involved in the actual optimization of that throughout that time of kind of optimizing the rigging and everything?
That one was working very closely with Southern Spars. I was working with David Barnaby from Southern Spars at the time, and the masts back then compared to today were quite rudimentary. I mean, you look at how technology advances, and they were compared to today tree trunks, and so the technology side of it was all still at the very beginning. I mean, you could say it was moving along, and back then it was absolutely the pinnacle. But the ropes and all that stuff was still, everyone was still learning, different brake loads, and things were a lot different then than they are now. And the knowledge that we all have now is nothing. I mean, compared to then is incredible.
Yeah. Cool. And so, what was your journey, I guess, then from that to moving on 2008 to 9 Volvo Ocean Race? That must have been quite a different. I mean, it's a very different type of racing and yacht, obviously. So, I mean, how did you get from one to the other?
I mean, all of this is based on being in the right place at the right time. I know Valencia in Spain is where the America's Cup was, and Alicante, which is actually a town in the province of Valencia. Valencia is a province like a state. And I got a word that they were looking for someone down in Alicante. It was an hour and a half train ride, so I jumped on the train. I went down there and lobbed into the office and said, "I'm here. When can I start?" And that's sort of how it was. Basically, I had the Cup finished in July 2007, and then 3 weeks later, I was working in Alicante in 2007. So I had 3 weeks off. I did a bit of a tour around Spain, and then straight into it. Pretty well, not without a break. And I went from 2007 all the way through, and that was a tough period as well. Different boats, but same deal. Lots of hours and lots of stuff going on.
Yeah, and I imagine, I guess, with the Volvo Ocean Race, you're very, very busy for a period of time, and then they're out sailing, and you're, what are you kind of doing in between until they get to the next port?
Well, how it worked back then, because obviously it wasn't the boatyard, which everyone was familiar with for the last two editions. Back then it was full teams. I mean, we had pretty well in the team, permanent 50 people in the team. And we had basically each team had a minimum of 6 or 7 containers. And so what would happen was we'd had 2 sets of that. And so let's say, for instance, in Alicante, we'd have them set up, but we'd packed up the other set and shipped it to Cape Town. So, for instance, when the race started, we'd pack up the gear in Alicante, which was 4 or 5 days worth of work, while they're racing, obviously. And then we'd fly down to Cape Town, depending on how long we had. Now, I remember I somehow managed to get myself married in between all of that, and had my honeymoon in South Africa for 2 weeks. And then basically what happens is you end up meeting at the where the base is, and you get the containers and you put them all together. And we had our own loft floor that could put a full mainsail out. Volvo 70 mainsail. We had a full-time chef, or 2 chefs that were cooking for 50 people every day. We had boat building. We had my container at the back, which was for rigging and rigs. So I could basically have 2 rigs, because we had 2 boats, Telefonica Blue and Black. And I could just work with 2 other riggers, and we could just get everything done. So it was a major operation. They would then start the next part of the race, and we're into it, packing up again, sending that lot to the next one while the other one's going to the next spot. So in this case, we left Cape Town and went to India, then to Cochin. So in between the 2, while they're racing, we usually had a couple of weeks. So I went to, funny story, I went to India, and I bought a surfboard in South Africa because I wanted to surf in South Africa. So I did that, and I thought, well, now what am I going to do when I get to India, because there's no waves there? I thought I'd go to the Maldives. So I rocked up and got my board and off the plane and landed and got a taxi, went out to the local airport, and luckily enough, the lady checked my visa and she said it's only a one-way. I couldn't go. So I was stuck in India. Everyone else went to Europe or went around the place, and I'm stuck in India for 2 weeks. And my God, that was an experience. So I spent 2 weeks stuck in India. Oh, yeah, that was enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's funny. I know, yeah, because I reckon, well, even with a couple of weeks in between, there's a lot of work to get everything put away and then get everything back out. So pretty full on. And so I guess then after that, did you go kind of straight into the Mini Transat fleet after you finished with the Volvos, or you spent a bit of time doing something else?
Well, by the time I did all that, I got back to Spain, and I was pretty burnt out, to be honest. There was so much work, and it was quite taxing, for the amount of time that we were in beforehand. And so I got back to Spain, and I was obviously with my new Spanish wife and living that sort of, trying to settle back down, and I just couldn't. So I ended up saying, well, I'm going to do my own project. So I put an advertisement. There was a website back then called Yacht Sponsorship, and basically you put your CV up and you say, I want to do this, and this is my goal. And obviously no one came back. But in the end, one guy did come back, and he was from Argentina. He was a designer, and he was starting a new program. We went through it, and he said, would you like to sail for the program? And absolutely. He said, well, you can have the boat at cost, and that wasn't kind of in my plan. So I said, well, I can't really afford that, but let's keep talking. And one thing led to another, and the boat, which was a Mini 6.5, it's a series boat, so it was just the standard boat, not the prototype. For those who don't know about the series or the mini program, is that there's two divisions. Series is series is production, so it's just standard glass and aluminium rig and stainless rigging, no canting keels. And then prototype is whatever you want within the box rules. So you can have canting keels, it can be Kevlar, carbon, rotating keels, you can have anything you want. So this particular boat arrived in La Rochelle for the start of the 2011 Mini Transat, and I went up there and met the designer, and I sort of ended up project managing the project for him, and it went from there to where to become a part of the Mini Transat fleet in the series division. Excuse me. You have to build 10 boats, and so that was a massive effort, and we'd committed to that particular design, and so we went for it. And in the end, I did 14 boats, sold 14 boats, and we became officially a series boat on the eve of the 2013 Mini Transat.
Wow.
And to this day, we're the only non-French boat to still be racing in the fleet as a series boat. So a very big effort, proud of ourselves, and because it's a very, very French-dominated class, as you could imagine.
Maybe just for the sake, for people who don't know, maybe you could just give us a quick overview, like what the Mini Transat is, like what's the, what it's all about.
Well, Mini Transits started like all things start. Like the Hobart started as a tour down to Hobart back in 45 or whenever it was. The Mini Transat started the same way. In 77, I think it was, a couple of nutcases from the UK decided to sail their 20-foot plywood boats across the Atlantic. And it used to be run by the British, and they used to run a race every 2 years, and it got to that point where they were running a race, but the way the British were doing it, it kind of wasn't going anywhere. It was just sort of just people getting together and going for a cruise across the Atlantic. The French sort of started getting hold of it, and they actually took it to the next level, and they made it a class. Now, Class Mini 6.5 is the breeding ground for the sailors you see today on the Moccas and the Class 40s, and every sailor that's in those classes have gone through the mini fleet. It's kind of like the start of where it all begins. And the boats are 6.5 metres long. The box rule is 6.5 metres long, so 21 feet, and they're 3 metres wide. So they don't go upwind very well. Yeah. So they're designed basically to go across the Atlantic, and that's the box rule that's been around since day one. they have articulating spinnaker pole of 2.4 metres, so they're massive sail area. They're a real handful to sail, but they're extremely exciting downwind. Upwind, they're terrible. But majority of the sailing is done starts from La Rochelle or that part of the coast in Brittany, and then it goes across the Bay of Biscay down to the Canary Islands, where it stops for a week, and then they regroup, and then they take off across the Atlantic. And that's done solo, with one person on the boat. So all year, or for 2 years, you have a build-up where you've got to do 1,000 nautical miles to qualify on your own, and then you've got to go and do X amount of racing, 1,000 miles of racing. But every year, there's about 7 or 8 races in the Atlantic Mini Transat group, but then there's also 7 or 8 in the Mediterranean, so Spain, Italy, and the south of France. And so there's lots and lots of boats, and we'll have between sort of 20 and 80 boats at every regatta. Massive. It's huge.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's all double-handed and single-handed sailing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how about you've actually had some reasonable results, I understand, in the fleet. Tell us how you've gone.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, when I took the program on, I did a lot of sailing with a lot of owners. A lot of owners were coming down buying the boats. I was based in Valencia, so I was based in the Mediterranean group, and there was lots of races in Italy, lots of races in Spain, and obviously Marseille, France, where the next Olympics is going to be, the 2024 double-handed gold medal series, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah.
But I did a lot of racing with a lot of owners, so they would sort of like vie for me to be on the boat, obviously, because I knew the boats, and I was lucky enough to do a 500-mile race with one of my Russian clients, and we won the race. So obviously Australians don't really feature too highly in the Mini Transat scene, but to get a win was pretty exciting, and therefore you get you effectively get recognised as someone to watch out for. So it was good for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And good for your yacht as well. And yeah, no, and that's why I thought it'd be good to go through what it is, because it is more of a European thing, and not necessarily as well known down here. Like I guess I find really intriguing as well is that you didn't have a history, like a background in yacht design. And then, you took on this project and you came up with a yacht that's obviously done really well. So kind of the same thing with the rigging. I mean, how did you kind of go about not having a background in that and then, getting into it?
It's kind of like when I first hopped on the Wally board in at the Aquatic Centre, and I found myself the instructor was telling all the class how to do something, and I just got on the board and just did it, and it just felt easy. I was sailing upwind and tacking on the first day. Everyone was still on the little sails, and they put me straight onto the 6.2 square metre sail. Same sort of thing. When I get on a boat, I seem to have an affiliation with how the boat feels, and I always think about what, I never just get stagnant on the boat. I'm always changing trim like everyone, and trying to work out what feels right, and then eventually you hone that, particular boat into making it feel right. And I think with having the ability to be a part of the design or R&D is even better, because you can say I'm going to put this here and I'm going to try this, and it doesn't work, and so you put it somewhere else and it works better, and all of a sudden that becomes your sort of your go-to, in deck layout or where the rudders are, or that sort of stuff, because I just put 100% of time into sailing non-stop. And to this day, the boats that I'm doing have still got systems that I did, in 2011, and that's because it works.
Yeah.
So that's probably the best way to answer it, just on the water.
Yeah, I know. I think it's amazing. And I guess it would be a good segue into kind of one of the projects you're working on now, which is the X2 in conjunction with Farr Yachts. So kind of like an upgraded Mum 30 or Farr 30. Is that correct, or is it very different?
I call it a mini on steroids.
Okay. So tell us about that.
Well, I got a opportunity to work with Farr. It actually started kind of in a strange way. I don't know if anyone remembers, but back in when was it? 2016, I think it was, maybe 2016. The Volvo Ocean Race was going down the path of major change, and the Volvo Ocean Race decided or wanted to put forward the idea of having a catamaran, a 40-foot catamaran, foiling catamaran, as their inshore boat. So in other words, the boats would race around the world, the 65s, and then they'd get into import, and then they'd have a team that would go and do the import racing. But they were going to be on 40-foot catamarans with foiling systems. So that went out to tender, and I just contacted Britton Ward from Farr Yachts, and we ended up collaborating on that and got all the way through to the final two before we went over to Geneva to present it to Ernesto Bertarelli and to Volvo Ocean Race and everyone, and we sat in the room, we did it, and it was there they told us that it was cancelled. So we did all this work, we did all this design work, and we've got this boat still sitting there. If anyone's out there is interested in a 40-foot foiling catamaran, let me know. Because the design's there and it's free. You can have the boat, just need to build it.
Yeah.
But I mean, the boat was a weapon. But anyway, I sort of had this rapport with Britain, and we sort of talked about what was happening in the southern hemisphere with Farr. Farr Yachts obviously were very focused on, at that stage, the Volvo 65s. So they were really busy with that, and I sort of said, well, let me help you out down here, and we started talking about designing boats, and we did a fast 40 and a 43, which we've designed, but obviously very difficult to move those types of boats price-wise. You're over $1 million and $1 million Australian just to get a boat with a mast in it without sails and electronics. So that's always a big one. And sort of time went by, and the double-handed series, which is very dear to my heart, has made a massive growth here in Australia, but also around the world. And so I said to Britain, let's do a 30. Let's reinvigorate the 30 scene for Farr. As you know, Farr did the Mums, the Plateaus. They did the Mum 36s. They did all those boats, and so that that's where their bread and butter is. And go back even further to the old the old, I think they were 1080s or whatever they were back in the 70s, with Bruce Farr first designed the boats in New Zealand. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these boats, but all that size. And so I said, let's do a 30, and we were going through the process of working out how to get it, how to expose it, and there was a fella here interested in helping out, and I was just waiting for the all clear. And with any new project, it's very difficult to get off the ground if you don't have some form of financial support. In the end, he sort of backed out a little bit with some business issues that he had to deal with. So again, I found myself on the drawing board just waiting. And then this current crisis sort of reared its ugly head.
Yeah.
And so I looked at it as an opportunity, to be honest. I looked at it as a marketing opportunity. And I managed to get the editorial for sailworld.com last Sunday. And I put it out there.
I'll share it on the chat in case anybody missed it.
Not quite knowing what to expect, and basically the last week and a half, it's been nuts. So I've had builders contact me. I've got a very full pipeline, and it's looking like we're going to be moving sooner rather than later on possibly the first 4, and then maybe more after that straight away. So stand by, watch this space. The X2 it's called. So we're getting away from calling it a Farr 30 because there's already a Farr 30 around, which is an older design. The X2 meaning ×2, meaning double-handed. So that's the background behind that. It's designed for the double-handed series. You can race it with a crew if you want to do it Super 30s or IRC. So it's built for ocean racing, and you can do the Sydney to Hobart and the Sydney to Auckland and the Fastnet and the Middle Sea race for any international listeners. So the boat itself is it's going to be a weapon. There's a big push now for these size of boats with the Sunfast 3300, the JPK 1030s and 80s, and the Delair 30, which are all boats that are trying to get into the Australian market. But with the Australian dollar to the euro, they're a bit of an expensive option. So for us, we're looking at building here either in Australia or in the very near southern hemisphere, which keeps the price down and makes it accessible for the Australian owner to get into it. So we're really excited.
And you mentioned you could do a Sydney Hobart on it, so it's obviously a far cry from a Mum 30. How is it? So, what's the similarities? What are the differences, I guess, for people who maybe know that class?
You can do a Hobart on a Mum 30. You just ask Paddo from and the boys from Lake Macquarie.
I guess maybe my standards are a bit different.
They did it on a boat called Tow Truck many years ago, but they're a different breed. I don't know if you've met Paddo from Lake Macquarie, but he's a beauty.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, we've got a question from Shibumi, actually, from Brian. Maybe I'll just put him on. He's got a question about the yacht. Brian, can you take yourself off mute and then you can ask? Or I'll just... Oh, yeah, he's off. Hey, can you... Nope. Okay, we can't hear you, Brian, so I'll just ask for you. Oh, are you there now? Nope. So Brian's basically asked about apart from hull speed, how much crew ergonomics and access play in design?
Oh, heaps. Modern design these days, obviously with all of the CFD or computational fluid dynamics, as it's referred to, is based on computers working out hull shapes. And at Farr, for instance, we have a computer program. We can set a boat up for, let's say we want it to be an all-round boat in Australia with certain conditions, average size of seas of 1 metre with average wind speed of 15 knots. We'll plug that into the computer and we push it through, and the computer will spit out between 3,000 and 5,000 different designs, and just non-stop, just boom, boom, boom. The power is insane. So hull design itself is so finite now, and making sure that you've got the right all the things in the right place, and then that moves to the ergonomics. And as you say, the way the deck is laid out, the way the interior is laid out, all that is directly relative to the performance of the boat. So, for instance, we're talking about them at the moment, how we're going to set up the nav station with the pipe cot in double-handed mode for this particular boat, and we're thinking about something like a gimbal module inside the boat, that the whole thing swings from one side to the other. So you have a pipe cot that you slide into, and the nav station's towards the aft of the boat, and you can just move the thing from side to side. Because you're trying to get rid of having stagnant weight. So, in terms of the boat also will have 250 litres of water inside, so we'll have water tanks. In double-handed racing, when you're sailing upwind and reaching and downwind, water and the way the boat sits in the water itself is really important, because it's built to a certain design. If you're too bow down, you'll be pushing too much water. If you're too bow up, you'll be pushing too much water as well. So, you've got to understand your boat, and that comes with the knowledge from the computers, and we can actually then say, well, that's the beauty of today's sailings. We can tell you how to sail the boat efficiently.
Nice. And we can't hear Brian, but if you had anything else to add, Brian, just chuck it in the chat for us. So Brett, and sorry, when I was asking you that question, I think you were trying to add something else from previous. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover off about your X2 project?
I think we were talking about ocean racing.
Yes.
So the boat is designed for the Sydney, well, not the Sydney. It's designed for the double-handed series in Australia and New Zealand. But there's obviously the double-handed series in the UK, which is hugely popular now and they've just allowed it into the Fastnet last year. So the Fastnet race is now part of the series. Okay. We're starting to see things like Middle Sea Race now is going to be accepting double-handed boats. So we're getting more and more of this growing really, really rapidly. And one of the beauties of double-handed boats and boats of this size is you no longer have to be look for 10 crew to go sailing on the weekend if you're racing, any type of boat, whether it be a Farr 40 or a Sydney 38 or, MC 38 or those sort of boats, which are all fantastic boats. But, people are moving away from that. Not everyone, but people are moving away from it because they like the idea of, either with a mate or a professional going sailing and just having the two people. And I think that's creating a bit more of a hands-on approach to the next next 4 years of sailing, at least, until the Olympics, because everyone everyone wants to have a go at it.
Yeah, well, and with our current social isolation measures, we all might be going to solo and two-handed sailing. So hopefully it doesn't get to that, but it's definitely a different kind of challenge, isn't it? I know Brian, who asked the question, and I've just done a couple two-handed races around the harbour, which is a very different thing than doing an all ocean race.
He just brought up a question. I can see the question, so I'll answer that
cool.
for him. For everyone out there, he says, there was mention of double-handed sailing. What key design features pop out for double-handed?
Yep.
Look, double-handed sailing is, and solo sailing for that matter, is a whole new ball game. You're not relying on many hands to do many jobs. You have to try and think about it all yourself. In double-handed mode, for instance, and particularly with the X2, we'll have a lot of furling sail setups. So you'll be into a furling A3 type of sail very early in the piece, with maybe a furling jib top and then a furling staysail inside it, so you'll be able to triple head. Or you could just be with a jib top with a Genoa staysail, all furling. That's probably the biggest thing is that you're utilising furling systems. If you're going to fly an A2 type of sail, you're generally in conditions that enable you to do that. So you probably wouldn't run an A2 double-handed in anything over 15 knots. So over 15 knots, you'll be going to your furling sails. And the furling sails are fantastic on short-handed boats as well, because if you do get into trouble, you just furl them up,
Yeah.
And on top of that also, because they're so light, you can get your apparent working so well, and that comes down to how good a sailor you are. You can actually drive the boat really deep with speed. And things like the deck layout and the control lines, all with the modern stuff today is a lot different than what it was even 10 years ago. The systems are very user-friendly. You don't need winches and you don't need grinders and you don't need all that. You can get away with it. So it makes a huge plus if you focus on making things really simple. Yeah.
Another question?
Do you have a preferred reefing main system? I do actually, because you are short-handed. And what you have to understand when you're short-handed sailing is you don't want to be waking up your partner every 20 minutes. Realistically speaking, if you're in hard conditions, you wouldn't be doing any more than an hour on and an hour off. So in that hour, you need to be managing your hour. Sailing solo in bad conditions, we were 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off. You'd get into that system. You'd find that was your day, 20 minutes long. In terms of main reefing systems, I really like the lazy. I swear by lazy jacks for double-handed systems. A lot of even in the last Hobart on the TP52, we ran lazy jacks. You cannot compete with having something holding the sail as you're pulling it down. As it's dropping down on its own. So lazy jacks are number one. Number two is when you're short-handed is to have a luff system that's connected to the outboard end if you can. If you've got everything set up right, you should be able to wind it all down at once and it comes into the same spot. So that can be set up with your riggers. If you can explain that as you pull the luff end down, it pulls the outboard end down at the same time and it locks it all into place. And then that is for short-handed sailing. That's really the way forward. And you don't have to keep waking up your crew to come up and help you because otherwise you'll be burnt out, especially in a Hobart or something like that. With this, what everyone has to understand as well, though, the Hobart is now, this is new territory. racing 30 to 35 footers double-handed in a Hobart. Well,
Yeah.
we'll see how that pans out.
Yeah. So are you gonna take one down next year?
Yeah, well, that's the plan. I mean, hopefully the X2 goes into production, and
Yeah.
I feel like I'm still stupid enough to give it a go. So
I think it's great. And with the Olympics coming up in the new offshore two-handed division in the Olympics, so I know they were looking at different options around training yachts. Are you guys in the running for that? Are you looking into that at all?
we didn't design the boat or even release the boat for the Olympics. This is a boat that is market-driven. The X2 is performance-based. It's got it's going to have all of the latest of the deck gear. It's going to have all the latest of whatever we can get on that boat within a budget to make it an enjoyable, fast boat to sail. The Olympics, which they're going through going through a selection process, if you like, of a boat, is going to be something that's going to be relatively one design. It will be and I would be thinking that it would be aluminium rig and stainless rigging and generally a boat that does the job, but isn't as tweaky as some of the more high performance stuff. In saying, did we do the 30 for the Olympics? No, we didn't. But we like to be seen as a player in the market. It's all a little bit up in the air as to what's happening with the boat at the moment that they're going to be choosing, but I'm assuming that we'll know more in the future.
Yeah, last thing I heard, they were still going through the selection process. So, unless that's changed, I believe that's still where it's at.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't personally looked into it too much. There was rumours about specific boats in Europe. The biggest issue they've got, and something that, especially between now and the Olympics, is because a lot of the countries don't really have teams set up yet. In terms of training programs, and it's not like I'm going to start a 49er program. You've got all the numbers, you've got everything, and you get on a 49er and you go compete and you do events. What they don't want to do is they don't want to release a boat too early because there's going to be countries with advantages, and France in particular are going to be they are the leaders by far in shorthanded sailing, and they know exactly what the deal is. And Marseille is where the event is going to be held, which is in the Gulf of Lyon, which is a particularly nasty place to sail. I mean, the Francis Drake used to call it the Bay of Broken Boats back in the 1600s or 1700s, whenever he was around. It can turn it on. It's the breeding ground of the Mistral storm katabatic breeze from the French Alps. The guys that are in that area, the French guys and the Spanish and even the Italians, they're used to sailing there. So if they've got a boat that they can sail from now until the Olympics, then it puts everyone like Australia and New Zealand and all those people already on the back foot because we don't know the boats. So the plan, as far as I'm aware, is they won't be releasing the boat until very close to the Olympics, 6 or 8 months out or something. Which enables all teams to then start their training process, close to the Olympics.
Yeah, well, and that's right. Like with the French, I mean, they've got that offshore yacht training center there, don't they? Which is a fantastic setup. So they're definitely
up in Lorient. Yeah, I mean.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Lorient. For anyone who gets a chance to go to France, go to Lorient.
Yeah, I actually got to go to the yacht racing forum there. It was I think it was a year and a half ago. So yeah, we had a good tour around, and it is fantastic. Just the amount of money they put into things. So sailing in France, especially kind of offshore and short-handed sailing, is very popular.
Oh, it's massive. I mean, they're treated like heroes. I mean, they
absolutely.
The other thing that's really
like our rugby players.
Yeah, well, the other thing that's really important to mention about the French sailing scene is the amount of sponsorship dollar that's available, and it's almost a status symbol if you're sponsoring a racing yacht. Like these big banks and all that, which are allowed to sponsor boats. I mean, in Australia, it's almost almost hissed upon if a bank sponsors a boat. It's kind of sad because we don't have that type of attitude towards it. I mean, it is an expensive sport, but that's why you see the French cruising around in these 100-foot all-team, maxi trimaran. I mean,
those teams. I mean, one little break on that is there's €1 million gone or something, right? So.
Yeah, we're only chatting today on the podcast, which we'll go through in a minute. We actually had Guillaume Verdier on the show today, and
I'll have to listen.
He was talking about the building a foil for the boats for those Ultims, and it's a 1 year project, 1 year process to build it.
Wow. So if anyone here doesn't know the Ultims, definitely take a look. I'll try to pop up a link afterwards as well, but it's ULTIME is how you spell it, and they're 100-foot trimarans that they use to do some of these massive kind of cross the Atlantic races and stuff like that. So
round the world, solo.
And around the world, yeah. Lots, yeah. Solo racing in 100-foot trimaran. And what kind of speeds do they get on those? I mean, they're massive.
Well, we were speaking to Guillaume Verdier today, and he said they'll sit on 37 to 39 knots, so without thinking. And he says at that speed, you're walking around drinking coffee and relaxing. Yeah. Once it touches 40 knots, you're starting to think. His top speed, I think he said, was 49 knots. And that's crazy. That's just nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy, but fantastic. So, I mean, you talked about the podcasts. Tell us a bit more about that. So, how did you kind of get into? Where did that idea come from? How did you get started?
Well, the podcast is called Bar Karate, and I'll explain Bar Karate for those who don't know what Bar Karate is. It's if you come in off the water at the regatta and you sitting around having a beer after the race, you'll see a lot of people doing this, talking about I was on starboard and I was coming to the top mark and he tacked underneath me and I So Bar Karate effectively is that. A lot of people go, what's that got to do with sailing? Well, it's got everything to do with sailing. So next time you come off the water, have a look around and you'll see everyone doing it. Just naturally, everyone does it. So Bar Karate was born sort of as a crazy idea of we're all big fans of Top Gear, for example, the car show with Clarkson and those guys. It's with Nick Bice. Nick Bice is was the technical director for the boatyard at the Volvo Ocean Race, so he knows a little thing or two about yachting. And Jordan Spencer is a world-class coach and world-class talker. Really, that's how you sum Jordan up. He's the host of the show and he loves it. We came up with the idea last year to do something because we were sort of enjoying just having a beer and having a chat. And it went from there, and it just we started it last July, and we've gone from being having a couple hundred listeners, and now we're into the thousands. We've just celebrated our 30,000th download, and now easily ranking number one sailing podcast in the world at the moment. And we generally get a guest on every week, and we take the piss out of them, have a laugh.
Nice. I like it. And especially right now, everyone's looking to get online and stuff, and which is, where this came from. I thought, we're missing our evening twilight sails and getting out and having a chat and having a laugh and having a drink. So I thought, well, we can still do it online. So, yeah.
So we're attracting some really big names. I mean, if you go through the catalogue, there's 46 shows or something. But the last 3 weeks in particular have been massive. We had Robbie Nash on 2 weeks ago. And for those who don't know, Robbie Nash won his first world titles as a windsurfer as a 13-year-old in Hawaii in 1976, and is considered by most to this day as the greatest ever windsurfer to compete and still competing. And then and this week's show was Tom Slingsby. So we had a great chat with Tom, and the chats are done in a very low-key, unscripted very much similar to this. No real organisation, and just generally we have a laugh, and that's how it goes. And today we had Guillaume Verdier, who'll be on this next week. So
yeah, definitely going to be listening for that. Yeah, really cool.
Just had a question come up here.
Had a question. Yeah, should I read it out? So from Brian as well. After competing in lawn offshore events, how do you cope with racing rules of sailing and tactics while in close quarters like Sydney to Hobart start?
Well, that's a sore point for me, to be honest.
Tell us.
I don't know if you know, but this year I went south on Envy scooters, TP52, and I was pit trim, so sort of not really had much to do with decisions on the water, and we found ourselves in a bit of a situation. And unfortunately, we did the entire race thinking we were clean, and we were. But that's just a hear nor say no in an argument sense. You've got to prove it. We got third on IRC actually overall, and then unfortunately we lost a handicap and went from third to sixth. So that probably answers that question. How do you handle, or how do you cope with the racing rules and tactics while in close quarters at Sydney Hobart start? This year, not too well. In general,
what would you do differently, maybe? What's a learning from this?
Or is there one? Not dissimilar to the Wild Oats Comanche situation. I mean, although that situation was blatantly obvious, we believed we were in a really easy cross. It was a good solid couple of boat lengths, maybe more. And in TP52 racing, there was 11 of us on the start line, so we were all still racing TP52. And we got to the last mark. We got to went right over to the edge of the racetrack, and we had to tack. And we came out, and it was an easy cross, and we just kept going basically. And in hindsight, there are people that would utilise a situation like that to use it as a card in their advantage. And but in hindsight, you will always do your turns. So to answer that question, if someone does call you on and you've got no proof of it, no video, no one willing to stand up and say that's just not how it happened or whatever, the answer is just do your turn. That's for the sake of 5 minutes. It cost us third place, and that's learnt by all on board. And I think even Rico from Wild Oats probably should have done the same thing 2 years ago, whenever it was, but
he'll never admit it, but yeah.
No comment.
Anybody else have some questions? We've had heaps of questions from Brian, which is fine. We can have more, but is there anybody else who has a question? Either pop it in the chat or feel free to take yourself off mute and ask away. Somebody's making dinner.
It's probably worth mentioning, Deb, there might be a couple of people here interested in the 98 Hobart as well. I was involved in that, so might be good to put that on the run sheet.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to pop people back on mute while they're making dinner and stuff, which is totally cool. So who are you sailing with in 98?
98 Hobart we did on Secret Men's Business.
Yeah,
that was
okay.
The MBD, Murray Burns DeVille 43. So we were, in those days, IMS. And so we were involved at the sort of upper level of that. And that was a pretty big event. So it's, if anyone's got any questions on that, I can answer some questions there. I mean, it was a... Yeah,
well, I mean, I have questions. And other people, please pipe in if you do as well. But I'd just be really interested to know, I guess. I mean, it just sounds like such a horrific year, but it from what I understand, it really depends on where you were in the fleet and how much it actually got you you got hit or not. I mean, what did you guys do? Did you keep going? Did you make it to Hobart?
Oh no, we were in the 40s, which were all the IMS favourites. So you had Sledgehammer, you had, Secret Men's Business, there was Terra Firma. Sort of Orion, and those sort
Yeah.
of boats. So it was hotly
Yeah.
contested for IMS back in the day. We had a cracker of a night, and we were going really well. All of us sailed down the coast in record time, poled out number 2 jibs and one reef in the main. I mean, we were flying. You know, back in those days, you could sail sort of those angles before asymmetricals, and basically we went down the coast and we found ourselves down basically at Eden with no wind, and I remember having the full main and the number one light and the number 3 on deck and just bobbling from side to side, you know, with nothing. Sort of Orion were about 1.5 miles inshore of us.
Yeah.
But it's sort of the western sky coming through, because we're at the entrance of Bass Strait,
Yeah.
which if you look back, is probably the worst place to be because of the east coast current hitting the corner. And then just out of nowhere, this breeze just built, and it just went from nothing to pretty well 80 knots straight away, and that's where it all started to happen. In terms of sort of Orion in particular, they rolled, and that's where they lost Glyn Charles, the UK Olympian.
Yeah.
1 minute they were there, next minute they were gone. So in terms of the 98 Hobart, we turned around, which was quite possibly the scariest jibe of my life. It's massive seas. We storm jib up, just putting in the engine, and we ended up getting back into Eden. I think we did 15 or 16 nautical miles in about 10 hours.
Yeah.
Just because we were doing boat speed, but we couldn't. We were doing 1 knot over the ground against the current, against the sea, and against the waves. You know, going into the coast. It was just insane.
So what sail area did you have up at that point?
We just had. There's actually some if you read the book Fatal Storm by Rob Mundell, there is a lot of photos of us because Richard Bennett flew over the top of us. We had a storm jib, and we were just motoring.
Yeah. Okay.
So we were. Well, I basically tied every possible triangle I could put in everywhere. I put triangles in, so halyards and sheets and bits and pieces everywhere, just to solidify the whole thing. I mean, we were, the waves were massive.
So when you say you tied triangles in everywhere, I mean, give us some examples.
Well, basically, some people tend to think taking the boom off and laying it on the side of the boat is the way forward, and I don't agree with that. I basically, we packed the main up as best we could. And so, things like I'd create a bridle from the end of the boom to the corners and just, crank them onto the winches, and then I had all the halyards going out to separate points around the boat. So effectively, instead of having side stays and forestays and backstays, I had sort of mid stays everywhere.
Yeah.
Just cranked them on and just made as many ways of keeping the whole thing together as possible. So it was it was just making sure that nothing was flopping around. I mean, you can't have loose stuff.
Yeah. In 80 knots.
Yeah, I mean, the big problem was the sea state. I've been in big seas before and big conditions before, and the problem was where we were, and also the fact that people that were doing that race, it used to be quite nonchalant back then. It was like, oh yeah, we're going to do the Sydney Hobart, and then we're going to, then we'll just go and do the race and get pissed in custom hours, And it's not like that. You can't do that anymore. It's the boats are so fast, and they were getting faster then. And the sea state was gnarly because of the current. We had massive current, and then a westerly breeze come through the other direction. We already had 4 or 5 meters swell from the day before, going north south. So we had north south swell, then west swell, and it was just out of control.
Yeah.
So questions come up here.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe out of your field, but where do you think club sailing is headed? Downward spiral of available crew, cost of boats, etc.
It's actually not out of my field, because this is one of our major reasons for putting Bar Karate together. We're sort of creating an informal forum, if you like, globally, of talking about how to do it and what the deal is, and a lot of focus gets put on high performance, and one of the key factors that has gone missing in the last few years is fun. I think that ideas that we're coming up with, and we talked about it today actually, is getting a boat back out there that you can build with your dad. So Dad gets the boat and you go out and you get the glue and you mix it up and you glue it all together, and you end up with a boat that you built yourself. That's what we used to do, all of us as kids. I mean, I would play around with my sails and my masts and make them stiffer and do this and do that. It doesn't happen now. Everyone seems to think to go down the shop and buy it. They have no reason why. I don't understand why they're doing it. They're just getting it because it says in the magazine. So that's probably the first thing. Cost of boats is, that's going to always be a problem. That's why, sailing boats like herons and lasers, or God forbid lasers, but, that's why they're so popular, because they're cheap. And people can go out sailing on the weekend, not necessarily to win gold medals, but just to go out sailing. It's a never-ending issue for our sport, and it's always a question that comes up.
And I was going to say, just add to that as well. I mean, that's one of the good things about being crew. So I grew up with my dad had a little boat, but for the last 10 years being in Australia, I've not owned a boat. I've just got to do a whole lot of sailing with other people. So hoping that, especially from our point of view, that the club sailing and crewing is not going away, because that's obviously what we're trying to do, is get people out there as crew as well. So
yeah, well, this says guest here. I don't know who that is, but they've come up with no clubs equals no pipeline of sailors, and it's true. One of the big things we've been discussing quite a lot on Bar Karate in particular is, and it's been a big forum, is based on coaches. One of the things that deters a lot of the rural teams from coming in and competing is the fact that they can't compete financially with these clubs. And we had an email come back actually, and it was very funny the way this guy described them. And he described them as the Royal Somethings. So, I work at the squadron, the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, and help out there. And it's true what they say. The Royal Somethings, they've got access to a lot more opportunities, and that's natural. It's how it is. We're in the big smoke. We're in Sydney. So the kids go out, they have a coach, tell them, pull the main sheet on, ease the main sheet, do the travel, do this, do that, learn, and, okay, but it all becomes a little bit sort of, taken for granted, if you like, from these kids. The kids out in the rural areas, or in the, not the cities, sailing down there, don't have access to these coaches who are professional coaches. And it does sort of downheartens them a little bit when they come to try and compete, and they've just got no chance. So one of the things that Adrian Finglass, who's a very, very good friend of ours, he's a magnificent coach, probably one of at the moment, the standout coach in Australia, has got some great words for it, and he does like the idea of having events where, you don't have coaches available during the event. Just lots of little things like that give these kids who don't have access to coaches a bit more of a chance on the water, because ultimately, even though it's not meant to be about winning, it's not about losing every race either.
Yeah.
You've got to, but it's such a double-edged sword, or double-edged knife, if you like. We want to produce, the legend sailors in our sport. We want to get gold medals, but we really cannot forget about, as they say, the bread and butter and the people that create the clubs. I mean, without all these kids, you don't have the clubs, and it's 100% true.
Yeah, no, and I guess it's not, you're not necessarily just there to win, but it's not fun to go out and lose everything and not even be in the running. So you keep, some of these legend sailors could potentially come out of smaller rural areas or areas that don't have the funding. So maybe, there's something in that, and kind of, providing some support there. Coaching regattas. I know they've done that with some of the women's regattas, as they've done coaching regattas, which goes over really well, because, you get to go and learn something as well as having a fun regatta. So.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, did anybody else have any questions that they wanted to ask Bret? Well, if there's no more questions coming through, Brett, was there any? I mean, we've gone through heaps of your projects. Was there anything else that you wanted to raise?
No, I think if everyone's happy, I'm happy. I mean, the thing is that we all stick together and keep doing what we're doing in these hard times. I guess talking sailing's as good as going sailing. For everyone to have a look at what's going on. I mean, the X2, and don't forget Bar Karate, guys. So www.barkarate.com. Get on. You'll have a laugh.
I'll pop that in the chat as well. So if anybody wants to just wait a second and take a look, then you can. So that's the Bar Karate link. And I've popped up the link as well with the X2, the article for the X2. So look, thanks so much everybody for joining again for our week 2. So yeah, I'm hoping we don't have to do this for too long because we can get back out of the water, but as long as it takes, we're going to keep doing our online catch-ups. And huge thanks to Bret for giving us so much of his time as well to tell us about all your adventures and ventures and businesses and everything that you're doing. So thank you.
No worries. Good on you guys. Have fun. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Record